All right, everyone. Hello and welcome to our webinar. Tonight we're going to be talking about avoiding non-targets when trapping with the Pig Brig Trap System. I'm Tony Fazzino. I'm the trap support specialist here at Pig Brig. And before we begin, I just want to talk about a few things. This webinar is being recorded, and the recording will be available over the next few days. And if you have any questions at all, be sure to send them down to the Q&A section down there at the bottom of your screen. You can also chat with other attendees using the chat section down at the bottom of the screen. And now it is my pleasure to introduce Aaron Sumrall here speaking about avoiding non-targets.
Appreciate it, Tony. I guess let's see. Do I have the ability to move the poll off the screen? And we'll kick this thing off. All right. So, folks, I do appreciate you spending your afternoon with us. Talk a little bit more about pigs. And if you're new to this is something that we try to do every month, same time, same day of the week. Try to do it every fourth Thursday. So if you want to start putting things on the calendars, we'll be getting out specific dates and so forth moving forward. But that's generally when we find that is that fourth Thursday. So whenever we get started tonight, what we want to do is we got a lot of things happening in the spring of the year. A lot of calls that are coming in from different places around literally the world concerning issues with facing non-targets and why you're trying to trap pigs. So what we're going to do tonight, we're going to talk a lot about those main non-target species. But I did notice is the feature with the chat feature going on there, the poll going on, that there were several of you that were putting in that you had other species of concern as non-targets than what was actually listed on the poll there. So we get closer toward the end of this. If you don't mind, put those individual species that you're combating that were in that other category, and we can definitely cover some of those as well. But like Tony said, that Q&A features where we're going to be tracking the questions as they come in tonight. And again, just like any other webinar, whenever we start answering questions at the end of this, there is no ending time. We'll answer questions until until you have been satisfied for the afternoon. Also joining tonight with Tony is John Kinsey. John is very astute in what he does with pigs and is very knowledgeable in all things wildlife. So he's going to answer some of these questions as well. So as we go through there, pound away on that Q&A, and we'll definitely take care of it at the end. But anyway, we're going to get right into the meat of this webinar tonight, the content part of it. And let's see here. There we go. So first things first, folks. I mean, if we're talking wildlife, it doesn't matter the species. Whenever we're talking wildlife, there is nothing that we can say that is an absolute. And what we mean by that is that you can't say that pigs are or they are not going to do a certain thing, because as soon as you do that, they're going to prove you wrong. For those of you that hunt deer or anything like that, you know that whenever you think you've got that buck patterned, what's the first thing he's going to do? Change his pattern. So whenever we start thinking about these and this with regard to pigs, everything in pigs can be local or regional. I've seen some things be very, very specific, even far closer proximity than just a local. And what we mean by a local, that may be the size of your county or a couple of counties around you, where I've seen animals act completely different that share a fence line on properties. It's just depending on what those actions are on that property. But something that we need to keep in mind as we go through this discussion tonight is that there's no one that's going to slap their hand on the Bible and say this is the way pigs are going to behave, because we know we're setting ourselves up to be proven wrong. The other thing that what we need to keep in mind as we're going through here tonight about absolutes is that everything has its own season, and in spring of the year, animals can get extremely picky. Fall of the year, they can get extremely picky, usually because there's those flush and nutrition that's out there that they don't typically have in other times of the year. So some of these things that what we want to think about, though, that we will see pigs and other wildlife species start to work in atypically is in the wintertime and in the summertime, whenever those nutritional availabilities are far less. And that's why we wanted to put this presentation where we do in the queue, because yeah, we're in March now, and it's unbelievable that we're already at the end of March and starting to warm up quite well. But we're going to be in the summertime here pretty soon. And the summertime and the wintertime are much alike in that the fact that typically those are the two seasons of the year that we see an increase in non-target competition at the trap sites. The reason for that is there's just not a lot of bait out there, not a lot of food there, and all of those critters on that landscape are going to take advantage of anything that's offered to them. And then on many times that could be that they're acting out of their norm. They're acting out of their norm because they don't want to starve. So when we start talking about trapping around non-target species and some of the things that we can and can't do and so forth, just keep that thing in the back of your mind that what we may see work 9, 10 months out of the year may not work as well whenever those animals are under some extreme stress, whenever they just have to find a way to live, to make a living. So just keep those in the I guess the big thing in mind that it's just everything is regional or local, and there's no absolutes. But first things first, on a few different species that are out there, and primarily, I've seen a few on the poll said that they were having some issues with trapping around livestock. And again, for me and my experiences over the years is that if you're having trouble with adult livestock, they're going to be, and whenever I say adult livestock, primarily what I'm talking about is cattle. Is if it's in the wintertime, is probably the time of the year that I see that most interference from those adult cattle. One is that they're could be on subpar, sub quality hay provided, that just still leaves them hungry, even though their stomach's full. Their nutritional needs are not being met, so they're going to be a little bit more hungry in the wintertime. The other thing that tends to give a little bit more trouble is that if there's supplemental feed being put out in the wintertime of the year, those cattle get accustomed very, very quickly to following any human that walks into the field with them that could have dumped out a bag of cubes 2 weeks ago. So whenever they see people baiting pig traps and things like that, whether they can or they cannot get to that bait in that trap, they still pose that high level of curiosity, just trying to get there, because they know it's something that was poured out of a bag and they think it's for them. So other times of the year that we see some interference from cattle is yearling cattle. I mean, whenever those calves get weaned off and they're in that 500, 600 pound range, they're basically like a bunch of teenagers, and they're going to get into stuff they're not supposed to be in. So what we need to think about in that time of the year is trying to think about where the rotation is going to be in there. So we'll discuss that here in just a second. But the couple of different designs that what we have out there that we've tested and have run through the ringer pretty hard in Pig Brig is a couple of different electric fence designs. Whenever we talk about using electric fence, then we're definitely always talking about using solar powered chargers, fence chargers. You can get a little $150 fence charger from any of your farm supply houses pretty readily. And what we use as far as the post are the step-in plastic step-in post or a regular T-post. If I'm using the plastic step-in post, then I don't care if it's white, if it's purple, or if it's black. I've used all three colors, and there's nothing there that causes those pigs to flare. If it causes other species to flare, that's great. That's the whole intention. But as long as it don't spook those pigs, then we can move forward. So the next thing that we do on those with using T-post though is, for me, if I know that I'm going to use T-post, the T-post or a 5 foot tall T-post. It doesn't have to be a hugely long post. 5 foot tall T-post, and we drive that post in the ground at a 45-degree angle. Now, where we locate that T-post is exactly in the same place that your ground anchor was supposed to be on your Pig Brig trap. So whenever you take that the orange end of the measuring strap, and you get to the point to where you know your ground anchor is supposed to go in the ground, that's where your metal T-post goes in the ground at a 45-degree angle facing the outside of the trap, so away from the trap. And then what I do is I drive that post in the ground until it's about 36, 38, maybe 40 inches above the ground. And that's the height of where I'm going to place my wire or my strands. The step-in T-post is something that sometimes that whenever livestock owners move cattle in on you without you knowing it, they didn't know that you didn't know they were going to be brought in. That could happen real easily with stalker phase cattle, those yearling cattle. Is that if you have to quickly go into an area and put a set of electric fence around your trap, then what I use is those step-in posts, and exactly where the anchor goes into the ground, that cabled anchor goes into the ground, is where I put my step-in T-post. So you're going to be about 3 foot or so away from the side of that trap whenever you make your circumference around there with those posts. Still, again, too, we're going to be using 10 posts, whether it's a step in or a T-post anchor. But whenever you're using the T-post anchor, if I know I'm going to already need an electric fence out there, then I just go ahead and put the T-post in the ground, because not only can I anchor the trap to the T-post, but I can put my electric fence on the top. It takes another step out of the process and makes it pretty quick. So the next thing there where it says height is important, height is extremely important. One of those components that we really looked at hard through the research and different places around the country is that if you get to anything above 42 inches, if you get anything above 42 inches, then you are prone to having livestock go under that electric fence. Those yearling cattle, yeah, they're probably over 42 inches at hip height already, but they're still going to tuck under and get under that. So the I guess gold standard height, if you want to call it that, is nothing less than 36 inches, but I don't want to go over 40. And I like to hang a lot closer to 36 if I can. And whenever I do that, that's exactly the height of that top clip on those plastic step-in T-posts. So once your step-in T-posts are there, slap them on, get on, and move on about your business. Then your regular standard T-post, you'd have to figure out how many knuckles above the ground or whatever it is there to make sure that you're at that 36 as a minimum. The reason why I don't want to go below 36 inches is that we have seen if we do go below 36 inches and you've got some really, really large hogs, that you can have those bigger pigs reach up and touch that electric fence part of it. And when they do that, folks, it's going to definitely change their mind. And it's probably not going to help with you catching pigs moving forward, because once those adult animals leave an area, it's not long before those subadults and things like that, those smaller pigs, go away. Now, the stranding itself on the electric fence is a 1/2 inch electro braid fence, and if you really want to get a response quickly, then you can put a little smear of peanut butter on there, and I promise you that they will remember that that electric fence is not something that they want to be around. So what we also need to think about is knowing your rotation. We've already talked about that. Know whenever you're going to have cattle in a field as best you can. And if you don't, be ready in case they do move cattle in on you, where you can accommodate accordingly. If for me, I get the chance to do so, I'm going to trap behind the rotation. And coming out of winter, it's an excellent location to trap, is behind that cattle rotation, because if those cattle have been fed any kind of supplemental nutrition over the course of the winter, any of that undigested nutrition into undigested corn flakes or whatever else is going to come out in the manure. And those pigs are going to be in those rotated fields behind the rotation, feeding on the undigested nutrition in those cattle piles, or those cow manure piles. So anyway, that's something just to kind of keep in the back of your mind, and where those cattle are. The next thing on there is, if we do use the electric fence for deer and bear, it's something that's going to be more of a short-term response, that a positive response for you anyway. And deer is going to have a little bit longer response than bears will. What we've seen in using electric fence with bears, still using the same height, we do not want to go below that 36 inches, is that if I'm using electric fence for deer or bears, I'm going to make sure that I use the peanut butter on that 1/2 inch electro braid tape, because you're going to have to induce that response. You're going to have to induce that contact with that electric fence, because a big bear is going to be less than 36 inches. And I'm sorry, but there's not if there's a deer in the United States that has shoulder height of 36 inches, he's a stud. All right. So anyway, we want to make sure that we still keep those minimum heights of 36 inches, but you want to make sure that those deer and bear contact that electric fence to get that response. We have used it before where a bear will respond the way you want him to on the very first time he encounters it, but the very next day the same bear is back, and that dude actually plays limbo on that electric fence and will truly slide under it, belly crawling to get to where the bait is. Deer are slower to respond than bear in coming back to a location. Whenever they do come back, it's usually the yearlings first that's going to come back out of curiosity and things like that. But those adult deer, they'll get to the same point of the way those bears are, and especially if they're under a stress condition, where if there's a doe that's lactating and doesn't have enough nutrition, she's going to go to where she's got to go to get food. And the same thing holds true for almost all classes of deer in a hard summertime, is that negative reinforcement is not sufficient enough for them to combat the stomach rumbling that they're facing. They're going to do it. Liquid fence is another one that we need to think about there as an option for deer. Not so much in the thing with bears, so forth, is because liquid fence is primarily emulsified egg solid, so it's basically rotten eggs. And we know that with the feeding behavior of bears being omnivores, they don't have a problem with eating rotten eggs at any given day. So it's not going to do you any good whenever you're thinking about using liquid fence for bears. But what we want to think about with using that before we do use that with the deer, we need to go back to what we just said about the electric fences, is that the duration of the effectiveness can vary. And so what we want to do is we want to think about, do we have to use the liquid fence, or is there something that we can change about with what we do with regard to trapping? Can we change the time of day that we go bait? Can we do something different that will give us the response that we need, that's more sustainable? Because what you'll see with the liquid fence, and this is something that we have seen, is that liquid fence at a full rate, what the recommendation rate is, and a pump up sprayer will hold the deer back. How long is going to depend on your local setting and what's available in that area. It's also going to depend on how many times you've put that liquid fence in front of those deer. So if you have habitually gone to the liquid fence in the past to use that as your catch-all, quite likely you're probably going to have some comments that think about, well, that's worked great to begin with, but now I'm not seeing that being a situation. It's not getting the results I want. And that's right, because if it's been overused, it's going to lose its effectiveness. So what we want to do is check those cameras for deer activity, and if the deer are coming at specific times of the day, deer can be very, very habitual too, but they also do not get along very well with pigs. So they're going to try to feed whenever the pigs aren't there. So if we look at the cameras, if you got them up on your traps, find out whenever that wave of deer comes through and feeds. And if there's a chance that you can feed between the time the deer comes through and the time the pigs are expected to show up, that's great. We can do that and avoid the conflict. Now, if you're like a lot of folks out there, me included, then it's something that those traps are just not right there in the back fence line on the property behind the house. You got to go a little ways for them. So in those situations, we need to think about some other options that are out there. Liquid fence, again, too, will get you a response that you need, but it's something that you need to think about incorporating that only as an as needed basis, rather than going out there every day, bait the trap, pull out the pump up sprayer and soak the corn. Other things that we have seen with regard to liquid fence is, even though effective, then if you have a half inch, quarter inch of rain, something like that, and it comes down in a short duration, a good pounding rain for a half an hour, it'll wash the liquid fence off your bait, and then you're basically back to now you have untreated bait. I have had people that's told me that they have fermented their corn using water and a liquid fence, and have gotten some responses that way. I have not tried it. I've had those responses to me. Might be something to look into if it's something you got the time and the want to go check that out for yourself. Now, get into some of the old standbys of what we've got out there is the fermented corn, and where does it work, where does it not? It's certainly referred to as souring. The main thing that I think about whenever we discuss souring corn is there is a heck of a lot of difference out there in some people's mind, the difference between sour or fermented and rotten. And if you open up your fermented corn vat to pull out bait for the day, and you've got little worms in there that's wiggling around, and then it's been in there for 2 life cycles, that's probably not soured. You got to the point where it's rotten. So that's something that whenever we get past that fermented process and it gets into the souring, or the rotting process, we're gonna lose the effectiveness of that bait very, very quickly. So whenever I'm using fermented corn, I do it for a couple of different reasons, but all I ferment is what I can use within 3 days. So I will ferment enough that I can use in 3 days, and then I have the process continuously going, where I always have, if you want to call it, fresh fermented corn, and I don't get to that rotten stage. So the only times I do that is, yes, that at certain times of the year. Spring of the year is not a bad time, because spring of the year, there's plenty of nutrition on the ground out there. The deer are just not as bad as what they could be in the winter or in the summer. And if they've got something better to eat than some of those stinky, nasty soured corn, fermented corn, they'll do it. They'll go somewhere else. But whenever you get into the wintertime and in those hard summer times, people are like, well, I tried that fermented corn. It didn't do any good. Well, if you hadn't had any rain in the rain gauge in a month, then no, it probably not going to do you any good. So in those situations, what I do is that, and what we need to make sure that we watch this or listen to this close is that adding the rice bran. Whenever I'm talking about adding rice bran, I'm talking about adding rice bran to the fermentation of the corn. So you're adding rice bran in on the fermenting corn. If you go out there and you pour rice bran on the ground to think you're going to keep the deer back, I'm sorry, folks, you're going to get the opposite response. Those dudes are going to be coming in a high gear to come to your trap. So if there's anybody out there that hunt deer, you know this. But if there's for those of y'all that are trapping pigs, what I do typically is if I'm fermenting a 5 gallon bucket of corn, I will use 2 pounds of rice bran. And whenever I put the corn on the soak with the water, the rice bran goes in at the same time. It doesn't take long at all for that rice to ferment, and now you've got a much more pungent smell than even fermented corn holds. So we have gotten some very positive results back from rice bran, adding it to that corn fermentation process. And whenever you're getting a 50-pound sack of rice bran, it can go a long way whenever you're only using 2 pounds at a time. So it gets you some mileage, and it's readily available. You can find rice bran anywhere you wanted to. Other things about the corn side of corn side of thoughts is something that there's a growing number of people out there that's used it. I've used it, and it's malted corn. It's going to take a few more steps in the process, but if you're trying to avoid those deer species, those deer, or in some places it is deer species, it could be elk, it could be mule deer in different parts of the country, is that malted corn. What that is it's corn that's sprouted. And the way that you get that corn to that malted state is you take your 5 gallon bucket of corn, you cover it with water, and you let it soak in that water for 24 hours. And before it gets to that fermentation level, you drain the water off of it. It's soaked up the corn, it's soaked up the water, and everything is saturated. And you'll notice about 2 or 3 days after that water is drained off, that corn will sprout. And once that corn has sprouted, it goes far lower on the desirability chart for deer than it was whenever it was just your standard dry corn. So that's something to keep in mind. Raccoons doesn't seem like they care too much for the malted corn. Bears, they don't care. They're pretty much like a pig. Whenever it comes to corn, they'll eat it in any phase, any way you want to put it out there. But the other thing, just to bottle it all up there, is fermented corn is considered an attractant for pigs in a lot of places. And to some level, I'll agree with that. And because if I use fermented corn at this stage in the game, I'm not baiting my traps with fermented corn. And if you catch me with a can of fermented corn in the bed of my truck, then it's probably just going to be a 3 pound coffee can. And all I'm doing with that coffee can of fermented corn is I'm soaking a rag or a sponge or something like that, and laying it on the trap cap of the trap and let the wind push that fermented smell throughout the woods, instead of me trying to carry around, I don't know, 4 or 5 gallon buckets of rotten or fermented corn. I end up getting stuff all over me. So I'll still bait with the dry corn, but I'll use the soured corn as an attractant, that fermented corn. So moving on, the next thing, this is something that is hit with a lot of interest that we've been working on. Pig Brig has been working on for probably 15 months now to make sure that we've got something that we can stand by, that we know that there's some very good likelihood that you're going to get some positive results in this. Is those of you that are dealing with issues related to bears. Because before, up to this point, we've talked about other options that are out there, but nothing really that a bear gives any respect to. Bears are extremely smart. They're very driven. They, for all practical purposes, don't have any predators of their own. So they're going to basically go and do what a bear wants to do. So what we had to do is we had to think about what can we use that would just absolutely turn a bear's scent glands off, or taste buds off. And what that is what we found is that bears and capsaicin do not go in hand. And so what is the capsaicin? That's the hot stuff in peppers. So whenever you put pepper on the table, you see people eating these one chip challenges and all this other kind of stuff that's out there. for whatever reason, that's what the hot stuff is. There's capsaicin. It's measured in the Schofield unit, and it's at different levels, from anything from just your regular table grade type things to all the way up to some unbelievably life altering heat on there. So what we used in this particular one, and again too, for those of you that are interested in the final workup of this, is that we do have it, and I'll see if we can't get Tony, work with Tony to put it into the Facebook owners group, and then possibly get it in a link on the website where y'all can go get it as easy as you want to, or just shoot us an email and we'll attach it to the email and send it right back to you for the guide that what we've developed for the capsaicin. And so you go, anybody can go get what you need. So basically what the capsaicin is, and I'm not going to go into the finite details of it, but it's all in that guide. If you're interested in using it, definitely go for it. What we did see in the capsaicin studies is that it was there were some very, very positive responses from bear, deer, and raccoons. So what you're going to need to know though is that the capsaicin Schofield unit, that what we used is in the neighborhood of 2 million Schofield. So the shelf name of the capsaicin, the pepper that we used, is Carolina Reaper. So you just got to make sure that you look at the purity levels on those Carolina, or on any capsaicin, but the purity level on the Carolina Reaper was above 99%. So you got to get the pure stuff. It can't be anything you're going to find watered down. Whenever you put that together, it is an organic. So you don't have to worry about FDA approval. You don't have to worry about anything specific or permitting or anything like that. But you do need to wear your personal protective equipment. What we mean by that is that when you're mixing that stuff up, it is in a powder. If you're in an area that you're working it inside the house, you got it at your kitchen or something like that, don't have the ceiling fan on. Whenever you do that, your wife's probably going to run you completely out the house. So the other thing is if you are mixing it on surfaces that you're going to have people encountering relatively quickly, you want to make sure you clean that up, because any residues left there that they're going to definitely know that they've come in contact with it. And the misfortune would be if it's somebody that don't realize it, and they put their hands on it, they rub their eyes. And I speak of this from experience. So it's definitely something that'll get your nose running, and you know that you've done it too late at that point. So wear your PPE whenever you're putting it out. What we do use to put it out is in a standard 1 gallon pump up sprayer that you can get at any garden center. And then we soak the top of the corn with it. Again, too, the guide has everything listed out as far as how much and what the rates are and stuff like that. So you can get that guide and take advantage of that if you want to. But the one thing, and it does say it in the guide as well, is that with this being a water soluble, then you put this on your bait pile, or on your bait at your baited traps. Be mindful of what the weather patterns are going to be. If you're going to get a weather system move through that's going to drop a half an inch of rain on you, with it being water soluble, it will dilute it and move that capsaicin down through the bait pile. So it may not hold its effectiveness like we know that it will, if you get those weather pattern changes and shifts and things like that. So what we need to know to keep in mind there, the last thing on this page anyway, is there is regional tolerances and seasonal food availability. And one thing that what we do, we're not just going to go out there and stick this up on the back of the property where we live and test it for a little while and just say, oh yeah, it looks good here. Let's send this out to the rest of the world. We literally have looked at this now for about 15 months, and we've had it tested and as far as Canada, we've had it tested through Texas, Oklahoma, Arkansas. It was in Louisiana for a long time, Florida, South Carolina, and Connecticut. And in those places, you may say, well, that all sounds well and good and all, but there's not enough bears to worry about in Texas, and there sure ain't no pigs in Connecticut. And I would agree with you. But the thing is, the way that this testing takes place is that the first thing that we got to do is we got to find out what the tolerance level is for pigs, because ultimately we don't want to stop catching pigs, but we want to avoid the other non-target species. So what we had to do to begin with is to find out where are the tolerance levels for pigs. So, and for those of us that live in the Lone Star State, we know we got plenty of them. So for many of those states, what we were looking at is, or find out what's the tolerance level for pigs. So once we found that tolerance level, then we started to roll that level back, or roll that amount back, until we found what the tolerance level was for bear, deer, and raccoons. And then from that point on, we could really start honing in on what worked and what did not work. So that's something that took some time. And then at the end of it is whenever Connecticut came in, because there's no pigs there. We definitely wanted to take some of those northern latitude locations that have high bear densities, put it out there in front of those bears and see what they do. So if they can confirm that, what we've seen in the South and in also too in Canada. So again, too, this is going to depend on seasonal food availabilities. And then what we did see is intolerances, and it'll talk about the tolerances in that guide, where it may be the difference between Florida and Arkansas. You may need to adjust that rate by 3 to 5 grams, but it'll explain that in that guide, just because of those individual tolerance levels of what those bears exhibited in the given area. But what we do know is that the bear had the higher level of tolerance. So by knowing what the bear had on the higher level of tolerance, knowing that deer and raccoons were far lower than that tolerance of bears, if you treat at the bear level, then you will have repelling ability on both the deer and the raccoons. So it's something that the beauty of Pig Brig is that this is not a marketed product for us. This is something that we knew that we needed to develop to make sure that we could help out as much as we could with you being successful and efficient moving forward with pig trapping. And we just hope that you're part of the Pig Brig family. But if not, we want you to still be successful in catching those pigs. So moving on, other approaches. All right, so we're wrapping things up here. If you got bears in the area and food is a not really too much of an issue, one thing that I do a lot of times in the South, if I know that my pigs, especially in the summertime, if they got external parasites like ticks and fleas and lice and things like that, they're looking for a place to get rid of those. And if you see the muddy spots on the light poles as you're driving up and down the highway, that's what they're doing. They're rubbing those light poles to get that petroleum-based creosote off those poles as an external insecticide. So whenever we have plentiful food availabilities, but we know that we have some insects, you may want to shift your whole bait approach to trying to give those pigs a relief method to get rid of those insects. And what I'll do in those situations is I'll put up I put a pole up, and I don't stand it up. I lay the pole down on the ground and I anchor both ends. And if y'all are interested in seeing what they look like, we can definitely get that in there to you too, and put some pictures up on the Facebook page too. But whenever we're thinking about this, is that bears, they may or may not still use that pole. Not very likely that they're going to, because when they were talking about using a pole, I'm going to either take that fish grease or fry grease or something of that nature. If last effort is if I've got burnt motor oil, and I'm going to pour it on a rug that's wrapped around that pole. And the raccoons and the deer will not mess with it at all. So they don't want that petroleum stuck to them or whatnot, because it mats their hair up. Bears are very, very shy to it as well, but I have seen bears in certain situations where if there's a mite infestation, or bears have lice or a mange or something of that nature, I have seen bears use it, but very, very uncommon. If you've got situations like that where bears are using such a pole, it's probably some other ecological concerns that are out there that we need to look at more so than trying to keep them away from a trap. The other things out there too that I do quite often, if I have just a ton of raccoons out there and deer, is I'll dig a hole in the middle of my trap. So basically, you get your trap up, you get everything going the way you want it to go, and if you've got pigs, deer, and raccoons on your trap, then what I'll do is take a set of fence post diggers and dig a hole right in the center of my trap, and it doesn't have to be around and much bigger around than the actual post hole digger itself. So basically, size of a volleyball or a coffee can or something of that nature, and I'll dig that hole anywhere from 18 to 20 inches deep or something of that nature. And I'll fill it up all but the top 2 inches or so. I'll fill it up with my bait corn. And then I'll cover that last couple of inches. I'll cover it with just the dirt that come out of the hole. Now, yeah, you're still going to have a little bit of bait on the top of the ground. You're still going to collect those animals, but you're going to collect your pigs too. And once those pigs can smell that corn in that hole, that 2 inches of dirt's not going to hold them back. So if you trap an area for very long and you use the hole, those pigs are going to quickly change the size of that hole pretty drastically. But the coons, yeah, they may hand down in there a little bit and dig a little bit out. The deer are not going to mess with it at all. And I say at the beginning of this, don't ever stalk in absolutes, but that's what I just gave you. But yeah, that's something that deer, you're not going to see a deer pawing into the ground to try to dig up some corn. So that's something that I think about whenever I've got a high number of deer in the area, a high number of coons. It's just giving me trouble. The other things in there is the raccoon ramp is basically whenever we've got raccoons in the trap, we don't want those raccoons to stay in the trap. We don't just there can be a problem for several different reasons, is the raccoon ramp. And I know that Tony posted this a couple of weeks ago on the Facebook owners group, and I'm sure that he can post it again, or we can send you a link individually, or you can even go to the website, the Pig Brig website, and find that video yourself. But basically a couple of different ways to be able to make that ramp. The quickest and easiest way to make the raccoon ramp is that wherever you put your trap up, look around in the wood lines around the edge of where you got your trap up, and I'm sure you can find a 4 or 5 foot long limb there that's big around as a baseball bat. And what we do is we hang that limb into the trap cap of that pig brig, and those raccoons, with that limb hanging down into the base of that trap, those raccoons will just climb up the limb and out the top of the trap. So no harm, no foul. We don't ever have a problem with coons not being able to get out of a pig brig that does not have a trap cap on it. So for whatever reason, though, sometimes you get those coons that you kind of scratch your head about from time to time and think, well, you figured the way in, and you can't figure the way out. So that's an easy way that they can pretty much all find their way out, just using that ramp. And the other way that we've used it is if you got any pieces of mesh around there or something like that you can weave into the top of that trap cap on that outside edge of that trap cap. They can climb up that weave or that mesh as well. I've seen quite a few people that'll put some 3-inch drywall screws into a 2x4, and then use those drywall screws to hang it in on the top end of that trap cap, and then let that 2x4 hang down into the floor of that trap. So you just think about how easy it is for a coon to climb a deer stand or a deer feeder leg, and we all know how easy they can climb a deer feeder leg. So it's going to be about anything you put in that trap that's going to give them the chance to get their toes hung in it, and they'll climb right out the top. Other things out there that are possibilities, and this is where we're talking more so in line with bears. It does a little bit of work on the pigs. I mean on the deer, but coons really don't care for soybeans no matter what you do. But we've seen a lot of success using roasted soybeans with keeping bears pushed back. So and there's been a few times that I've seen the comments come up on the Facebook owners group about trying to push bears back or push something back and not lose your pigs. And the comment would and reply back to that comment, and then I'd get a message or two saying, well, why didn't you recommend roasted soybeans? Well, knowing where that person was, looking up where their specific trapping location is within a county or two, if they don't have soybeans available, then it's not going to be anything that's viable for them to use in the first place. The second thing is that if you're using soybeans there, is it something that's naturally grown in those areas, or is it something that's not? I've been in places before where pigs have not seen soybeans their whole life, and you throw soybeans on the ground and they'll lay there and rot before they pick them up. So there are regional recommendations, there are regional preferences and things of that nature. So whenever we're making recommendation, we try to make sure we do some homework of where that trapping location is and what the likelihood of availability is there for a given bait. Other ones that'll is pretty good catch-all as far as non-targets is if you have a brewery in the area. Those breweries are always looking for places to get rid of those distillers grains, those old grains that they've gotten through that fermentation process. They don't have anywhere to go with them most of the time. So if you get in touch with those and get those distiller grains, the deer, seen very seldom do you ever see a deer take more than a bite out of distillers grains. Coons are the same way. I don't know so much about that with bears, but I do know that pigs have no trouble with getting right in there on top of it and eating to their heart's content on distiller's grain. The last thing here, and this is kind of, I guess, a pet peeve for me, and I think we all at some point have a pet peeve, is that for me, it's something that I've heard from the time I was little, even from my own family members, is that, well, if you want to get rid of those non-target species, just soak the bait in diesel, and that'll get rid of your non-target species. And there ain't no doubt it will. It'll get rid of your species, but it will also, and just not very long thereafter, it will get rid of your pigs as well. The other things that it's going to do is you got to think that diesel, or realize that diesel is a pollutant. It's a petroleum product. So wherever you put that diesel on the ground, if it's in any volume, it's gonna prevent any germination of any plants there from now till no telling when in the future, depending on the volume that you put on there. The other things that too to keep in mind is that, again, just the same thing that we've said several times throughout here this evening, is that I have watched deer many times stand over a pile of corn that's soaked with diesel and never slow down eating it. So it's going to be something. If there's a stress situation, that's not going to keep you back from it, or keep you out of it either. The biggest thing though, and all that said, the biggest thing for me is it's a pollutant. So whenever we go out there, we're supposed to be stewards of the land. We're supposed to be out there to take care of the ecology there and the ecosystem and leave it better than we found it. And whenever we go out there, and this is literally dumping diesel out on the ground, is point source pollution. And there's no other getting around it. So if you're trapping around a creek, a waterway, a stream, anything like that, and you have a big runoff rain and it soaks that diesel off your trapping location into that waterway, then there are some possibilities there that you're going to have a less than positive conversation with whoever your state water quality people are. Because that's going to be that little oil sheen that shows up on your neighbor's creek whenever it flows off of yours. So that's something that there's far better options. There's far better things that are out there to use than diesel, and it's something that you will never hear me put an ounce of agreement behind, no matter if or when or how the conversation ever comes up. So with that though, I think what we're going to do, we're going to wrap into questions. And the only thing that, as we were going through this, that I didn't think about this whenever we were putting the content together, and this may have been where it come into the other part of the poll at the beginning, is the other species that have a tendency to give people problems are birds. And primarily, whenever I'm talking about birds, it's going to be your turkeys, it's going to be crows, it's going to be things like that. Well, for me, it was a very eye-opening experience whenever Randy and I had the chance to go to Hawaii about a year or so ago, and their biggest non-target species, their biggest problem at the trap site, were feral chickens. So that was something that blew my mind, and it wasn't hard to see. Once we landed there, there was 1,000 chickens for every half mile on the side of the highway. Other things that had problems with bears or birds is on the vineyards in Spain. So whenever we think about birds being an issue with non-target as a non-target, what we did is we just simply cut out 2 foot by 2 foot squares of half-inch plywood. You put it 2 foot by 2 foot squares of half-inch plywood over the top of your bait in your trap. And whenever the pigs come in, they can flip that plywood super easy and get to that bait, and there's no problems there. You can serve your bait. But if you can show me a turkey that can scratch around hard enough to throw a 2 foot by 2 foot square of plywood out, I don't want to be in the woods with him. So there's no way that there's any of the birds that I'm aware of that's going to be able to scratch their way under a half-inch piece of plywood that's 2 foot by 2 foot. So bait your traps. We like to definitely, the Pig Brig protocol on baiting the traps. We don't want any of the bait closer than 2 foot or so, maybe 2.5 foot to the skirt of the trap. So you're going to have a pretty confined spot in the center of the trap where you're going to be baited at. So it doesn't take much, many of those squares to be able to cover your bait if birds are a problem. But that's super easy, super cheap, and probably 90% of you's got something in the garage right now as far as lumber that can do that. So with that, I know that's the last of the content part of it that we had, and I know that Tony's going to cue back in here, and then so as we're going to the questions, as Tony said earlier, put those questions in the Q&A feature, and depending on your device, I know Tony's is on the bottom, my Q&A feature is on the top. So put it in the Q&A there, and we'll track it. We'll answer questions until the questions stop coming, and then John's going to jump in here with us and answer questions as well. But anyway, before we get out of here, this is our contact information and everything that you need to know. Pig Brig. If you need to contact any one of us individually, go to the Pig Brig website. You can pull us up on the faculty page or the employee page. Contact us individually, or if you call there at the number on the screen, just tell them who you want to talk to, and you're going to get to talk to who you intended to, and definitely pass the word about the webinars, the availabilities, and hopefully we'll see you next month. So Tony, we have any questions?
We sure do. Thank you for that talk. So first one up here is talking about keeping aoudad out of the trap.
Yeah, aoudad are a headache. They're kind of a knucklehead. What we do know is on the aoudad side of things is that they are still pretty prone to jump. They have been known to push under the trap too. So what we do is try to keep the protocol for keeping aoudad out of the trap the same as what we do for whitetail. Is that for me, it's going to be making sure that there's no bait in the skirt of that trap to give those aoudad an incentive to push under. It's also going to be one of those things that for me, I never follow the methodology of gradually lowering that net to get it to the ground. It's either up or it's down. The aoudad are less likely to try to keep forcing their way under if that trap is in that completely closed status. But just from thinking, I mean, there's not a heck of a lot of aoudad, and I'm sure you're probably talking about in West Texas and that general area. Not as a lot of aoudad where we're used to trapping at where we're at. So I really can't speak specific. I know John may have some more insights on this, but I would almost guarantee you, knowing what I know about sheep, and an aoudad is a sheep, that capsaicin protocol may work perfectly good with you. So, John, if you got anything to add, definitely jump in.
No, just to echo what you would say about going from all the way up to all the way down. And I would point towards the capsaicin as well.
Yeah, and the one thing that what we do, and I mean, there's some outstanding trappers that's maybe even on this webinar right now that are just second to none as far as catching pigs, and they'll follow a protocol of gradually lowering it. And I'm not one to ever tell anybody to change the protocol if it's working, but for me, what we need to kind of do is what I do for myself is that I get into a repetition to know that I'm going to do it the same way every time. That way I don't mess it up one of the times. And the reason why I go all the way up and all the way down is not so much for the spring of the year, but it's for the fall of the year whenever we have antlered bucks. Is I want to get into a habit of making sure that I do not give that buck 4 inches of trap off the ground to try to push himself under. So I want that trap all the way up or all the way down. Same thing I would think would hold true for those aoudad. I don't know that they would push under that net readily unless there's some incentive for them to do so.
Awesome. So next question we've got here, this person is having issues with trapping deer this past winter. Do you have any suggestions on how to get them out safely?
You bet. So, and that's something that we need to think about with regard on as far as deer is keeping them calm. And whenever, if you got a camera on your trap, and which Pig Brig, you don't have to have a camera, but it's not a bad addition to have one, is that whenever I get up in the night, if I ever do see a deer on a trap or in a trap, I go immediately. If I don't see that I have a deer in the trap until the next morning, is try to stay away from that deer. That deer is going to be okay for the duration of the day, as long as you don't get them excited, you don't get them amped up. So whenever it comes time to getting a deer out of the trap, I do everything in the at dark. Don't ever go and try to let the deer out of the trap during the daytime. So what we're going to think about there is that deer have a problem with shedding lactic acid. And lactic acid is what makes your body sore after you've gone through strenuous activities. And if they can't get that lactic acid out of their systems fast enough, then there's some research that will suggest that will kill those deer eventually. So we want to make sure that those lactic acid increases are kept to a very, very, very minimal stage. So by doing that, trying to do that, that is going to be working that deer at night. So we go in under the cover of darkness. I try to do it by myself. I mean, that's just the fewer hands, the quieter I can be. If you do have somebody that goes in there to help you let that deer out of that trap, then they need to know exactly what to do, every step to take before you get to the trap. And the reason for that is, even if you're doing it in the cover of darkness behind a spotlight, then they hear that human voice, they're going to lose their mind and go crazy. So whenever I go in at night and let a deer out, I'll keep the spotlight on them, and the brighter the spotlight, the better. But keep that spotlight on them and work behind the light. If you have to use one hand to hold the light, definitely do so. Headlights, don't use headlights, because they'll see the front of your face, they'll see your arms, they'll see everything else. It'll scare them. So you're going to have a spotlight out at arm's length, and once you get that spotlight out at arm's length, then you can use the second hand, or if a second person is there, then what you do is you just simply unclip about 3 or 4 posts, the top line, the top of the trap, off of 3 or 4 posts, and it lets that net down. So once you've unclipped 3 or 4 posts and let that trap down, then just back out, staying behind that spotlight. No talking, no fast movements, nothing like that. Stay calm, and once you back out, then that deer will let itself out. And it's something it's extremely easily done. But the main thing is don't force the deer, don't push that deer. If by all means, don't try not to go during the daytime. It's not likely that yeah, we have people catching pigs in the daytime, but it's not as likely as it would be if you just let that deer alone. So maybe that'll help out. John, if you got anything else, Tony, also, if there's anything else to add. But for me, it's stay behind a spotlight, move quiet, use as few people as possible, and always do it at dark.
So next question here is, when bears climb in and out, do you typically see damage to the trap where you need to reset it or anything like that?
No, that's something that I've got a whole bunch of pictures on my phone right now. I wish I could connect and show you, and I can still send them. I can send them to whoever they need them at Facebook or at Pig Brig, and we can put them up for you. But one of the ones that's I think that she's more of a habitual issue on the trap that what we had out in for quite a while is a big sow bear, and every night she would crawl up to the trap, and her cubs wouldn't have any trouble. She had 2 cubs, and they would immediately go into the trap, start feeding on the corn, and she would set on the trap cap for sometimes from 15 to 30 minutes watching those cubs. And I know what she was doing. She was just watching to make sure another boar didn't come in. But whenever she got content with the fact that she didn't believe there was any trouble, she would climb off that trap cap after setting there up to a half an hour, and that trap would pop perfectly back into place. That's one of the outstanding developments of the Pig Brig, is that top rope was probably one of the more challenging things to find to make that trap as good as what it is, because that top rope and the other ropes that are there are designed not to stretch. So it's not like, I mean, even like if you consider a lariat rope will stretch over time. The traps that the rope that what we use on the top line and so forth in the Pig Brig, they can climb up and on it and over it and around it and through it and everything else all day long. And it's still, whenever they get off of there, it's going to be in perfect shape, just the way it was when you put it up. So once the bears are climbing up and over it, no harm. Just continue trapping and enjoy your day.
And then I know you mentioned the plywood trick earlier for birds. We've got a question here asking if you think that would help during the conditioning phase for deer and raccoons.
I've seen some mixed responses on this, so I think this is going to be more of a regional situation. I've tried it myself in a few different places for the exact same reason. One of the things that what we do know, and with this is new news to me, is that I didn't know it until probably less than a year ago, that as far as the total strength of a raccoon, and for whatever reason, there's some people out there that checked the strength of a raccoon and found that they can break a magnet at 27 pounds. So we've got some pretty stacked raccoons out there. So my thing is that, is it going to work on a raccoon? I think it will, if they get enough of what they're looking for that's already exposed. If they don't get enough of what they're looking for that's exposed and they're still hungry, they're going to do just like what they do anyway. I mean, we call them a trash panda because if they can't find trash on the outside of the trash can, they go to the inside. So I think it's going to still hold true that if they get enough on the outside and it's not covered up, yeah, you're going to see some success with covering it with the board. I think you're going to definitely see a lot more success with the deer, covering the corn with the deer, because those deer are less prone to trying to flip those boards and things like that. Now, with that being said, I've seen some deer move some pretty good size objects with their snout, their muzzle to move something out of the way to be able to get to food under it. So I think that's going to be a regional situation, but I definitely would appreciate the feedback. If any of you try anything like this, look into anything like this and see what works, definitely give us a call. And because I mean, we like to know the information as much as you do. So I would like to see it checked, but I've seen successes on both species.
Awesome. Well, I don't see any other questions up here, so I think that's going to wrap it up. Thank you, Aaron, for your time tonight, and thank you everyone for attending and all your awesome questions. This webinar is probably going to be sent out over the next few days, so keep an eye out in your email. And thank you, everyone, and have a great night.